You know what's wild? Friedrich Nietzsche, this guy who went insane and died over a century ago, understood human psychology better than most modern self-help gurus ever will. And today, I'm going to show you how to use his philosophy to outsmart pretty much anyone you encounter. Not in a manipulative way, but in a way that gives you such a profound understanding of human nature that you'll see through people like they're made of glass. But here's the catch. Most people completely misunderstand Nietzsche. They think he's about being a jerk, about dominating others, about some weird superiority complex. That's not what this is about at all. What I'm about to teach you is how to understand the hidden motivations behind everything people do, including yourself. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So, let's start with the most powerful concept Nietzsche ever came up with: the will to power. Now, before you click away thinking this is some alpha male nonsense, hear me out. The will to power isn't about dominating other people. It's about understanding that every single human action, every decision, every word someone speaks is driven by a desire to feel powerful in some way. And I mean everything. When your coworker compliments you, there's a power move hidden in there. When someone argues with you online, when your friend gives you advice, when someone posts on social media, when your boss criticizes you, all of it is people trying to feel powerful, to feel like they matter, to feel like they have control over their environment and their life. Once you understand this, conversations become like poker games where you can see everyone's cards. Let me give you a real example. Someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, I'm just trying to help you out here, but you really need to work on your presentation skills." On the surface, helpful advice, right? But apply Nietzsche's lens. What's really happening? That person is establishing themselves as the superior one, the one with knowledge, the expert. They're positioning themselves above you in the hierarchy. They're exercising their will to power by making you feel lesser so they can feel greater. Now here's where it gets interesting. Most people, when they receive criticism like this, they either get defensive, which gives the other person even more power, or they submit and say thank you, which also gives that person power. But when you understand what's really happening, you have a third option. You can acknowledge their move without giving them what they want. You might say something like, "I appreciate you sharing your perspective. I'm actually quite intentional about my presentation style." See what happened there? You didn't get defensive. You didn't submit. You acknowledged them, but you maintained your own power by asserting your autonomy. You outsmarted them by not playing the game they wanted you to play. But it goes deeper. Nietzsche talked about something he called slave morality versus master morality. And this is where things get really interesting for outsmarting people. Slave morality is when people define what's good based on what makes them feel safe, what protects them from harm, what allows them to avoid pain. Things like humility, obedience, self-sacrifice. These become virtues in slave morality. Master morality is different. It's about defining good based on what enhances life, what creates growth, what expands your capabilities. Think courage, strength, nobility, independence. Now, here's the kicker. Most people operate from slave morality. They're constantly trying to make you feel guilty for being strong, for standing up for yourself, for wanting more out of life. Have you ever noticed how, when you start succeeding, some people suddenly have a lot to say about humility? Or, when you set boundaries, people call you selfish. That's slave morality in action. They're trying to pull you down to their level by making you feel bad about rising above mediocrity. And if you don't recognize this for what it is, you'll fall for it every single time. Here's how you outsmart this. When someone tries to guilt you for your success or your boundaries, recognize it immediately. They're not actually concerned about virtue or morality. They're concerned about their own feelings of inadequacy. Your success makes them feel small, so they're trying to cut you down, using moral language as a weapon. The way you handle this is not by arguing with them about morality. That's a losing game. Instead, you simply refuse to accept their frame. If someone says, "Don't you think you're being a bit selfish by prioritizing your career?" you don't defend yourself. You might say, "I'm being intentional about my life." Yes. You've reframed selfishness as intentionality. You've refused to play on their moral battlefield. Now let's talk about something Nietzsche called ressentiment. This is probably his most useful concept for reading people. Resentment is when someone can't act on their desires, so instead, they twist their psychology to make those desires seem bad. It's sour grapes turned into a whole worldview. You see this everywhere. The person who can't get in shape tells you that caring about fitness is shallow. The person who's afraid to start a business tells you that entrepreneurs are greedy. The person who struggles in relationships tells you that romance is overrated. They can't have the thing, so they convince themselves and try to convince you that the thing is actually bad. Once you understand resentment, you become almost immune to other people's negativity. When someone tries to discourage you from pursuing something, you can ask yourself, is this genuine concern or is this resentment? 9 times out of 10, it's resentment. They're projecting their own limitations onto you. Here's a practical example. You tell a friend you're thinking about moving to a new city for better opportunities. They immediately hit you with, but what about community? What about roots? Isn't that kind of rootless and shallow? Now, if you take this at face value, you might actually start doubting yourself. But if you apply Nietzsche's lens, you see what's really happening. Your friend is afraid to make big moves in their own life. So they've constructed a moral framework where staying put is virtuous and moving is shallow. That's resentment. The way you outsmart this is simple. You recognize it, you don't internalize it, and you make your own decisions based on your own values, not their twisted psychology. You might say something like, I understand that's your perspective, but I'm excited about this opportunity. You're not arguing, you're not defending, you're just asserting your own path. But here's something even more powerful. Nietzsche said something that most people completely miss. He said that truth is not about facts. Truth is about perspective. There is no objective truth, only interpretations. Now, before you freak out and think I'm saying facts don't matter, let me explain what he really meant. What Nietzsche understood is that the same fact can mean completely different things depending on how you interpret it. Let's say you make a mistake at work. That's a fact. But what does it mean? To one person, it means they're incompetent and should give up. To another person, it means they found a learning opportunity. Same fact. Completely different truths. People who understand this have an enormous advantage in any conversation or negotiation, because they realize that whoever controls the interpretation controls the reality of the situation. Think about political debates. Both sides often agree on the basic facts, but they interpret those facts in completely opposite ways. The winner isn't the person with better facts. It's the person who can make their interpretation seem more compelling. So how do you use this to outsmart people? You become very intentional about framing an interpretation. When something happens, you don't just accept other people's interpretation of what it means. You actively shape the narrative. Let's say you're in a meeting and someone points out that your project is behind schedule. That's the fact. The person who pointed it out wants to interpret this as evidence that you're not capable. But you can reframe it. You might say, we're taking extra time because we discovered an opportunity to deliver significantly more value. We could have hit the original deadline with the basic version, but I thought it was worth the delay to exceed expectations. Same fact, completely different interpretation. You've outsmarted them by controlling the frame. Now, Nietzsche also talked about something crucial for outsmarting people, and it's going to sound harsh, but stay with me. He said that most people are part of the herd. They don't think for themselves. They adopt the values, beliefs, and behaviors of whatever group they're part of. They're not individuals making conscious choices. They're basically sophisticated sheep following the flock. And here's the uncomfortable part. He's right. Most people don't question why they believe what they believe. They believe it because their family believes it, or their social group believes it, or because it's what they were taught in school. They've never actually examined their own beliefs independently. Once you see this, you have an enormous advantage, because herd mentality is predictable. If you understand what tribe someone belongs to, you can predict with shocking accuracy what they'll say, what they'll believe, what they'll value, how they'll react. It's like having a cheat code for understanding people. But more importantly, you can avoid falling into herd mentality yourself. You can start questioning your own beliefs. Why do I believe this? Is this actually true? Or is this just what my group believes? Am I making this choice because I genuinely want to, or because I'm afraid of what people will think if I don't? When you break free from herd mentality, you become very difficult to manipulate, because most manipulation techniques rely on social pressure, on appealing to group values, on making you afraid of being different. But if you've already done the work of thinking independently, those techniques just bounce off you. Here's a practical application. Someone tries to pressure you by saying, "Everyone is doing it this way." Most people feel compelled to conform, but you recognize this as an appeal to herd mentality. You can simply respond, "That's interesting, but I prefer to evaluate things on their own merits rather than just following what's popular." You've outsmarted their manipulation attempt by refusing to accept that popularity equals correctness. Let me tell you about another Nietzschean concept that's incredibly powerful: the idea of eternal recurrence. Nietzsche asked, what if you had to live your life over and over again, exactly the same way for eternity? Every moment, every choice, every action, repeated infinitely. Could you embrace that? Would you want to? Now, most people hear this and think it's just some weird thought experiment, but it's actually a profound psychological tool for cutting through nonsense and making better decisions. Because when you apply the eternal recurrence test to someone's behavior, including your own, you see whether they're living authentically or just going through the motions. That person who complains constantly about their job but never changes anything, would they want to live that life eternally? Of course not. They're living inauthentically, stuck in a pattern they hate but too afraid to break. Once you see this, you don't take their complaints seriously anymore. You recognize that they're not actually looking for solutions. They're comfortable in their misery. You can use this on yourself too. Am I doing things I'd be proud to repeat eternally? Or am I wasting time on things that don't matter? Pleasing people I don't care about? Avoiding challenges because I'm scared? The eternal recurrence test cuts through all the rationalizations and excuses. It forces radical honesty. When you're in a negotiation or a difficult conversation, you can apply this test. Ask yourself, am I behaving in a way I'd be proud to repeat for eternity? This keeps you grounded in your values. It prevents you from being manipulated into doing things that violate your principles just to avoid temporary discomfort. Here's something else Nietzsche understood that gives you a massive advantage. He said that suffering and struggle are not things to be avoided. They're actually necessary for growth. He said, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." But not just that. He said that you should actively seek out challenges, that you should love your fate, including the difficult parts. Now, why does this help you outsmart people? Because most people are operating from a framework of avoiding pain at all costs. Their entire decision-making process is built around staying comfortable, staying safe, avoiding risk, and this makes them incredibly predictable and easy to manipulate. Think about it. If someone's primary motivation is avoiding discomfort, all you have to do to control them is threaten their comfort. This is how most workplace politics operates. This is how toxic relationships function. People stay in situations they hate because leaving would be uncomfortable. But if you've internalized Nietzsche's perspective, if you've embraced challenge as necessary for growth, then threatening your comfort doesn't work anymore. You're not afraid of struggle. You expect it. You might even welcome it because you know it's making you stronger. This completely changes power dynamics. Imagine you're in a negotiation and the other person thinks they can pressure you by making things difficult, but you're not bothered by difficulty. Suddenly they've lost their leverage. You're willing to walk away to endure short-term pain for long-term gain, to stand your ground even when it's uncomfortable. They're not willing to do those things. You win. Let's talk about something Nietzsche said about truth-telling that's controversial but incredibly useful. He said that sometimes, perhaps often, honesty is a form of cruelty, and lies can be a form of kindness. Now, before you think I'm advocating for lying, hear me out. What Nietzsche understood is that most people don't actually want the truth. They want validation. They want comfort. They want you to tell them what makes them feel good, not what's accurate. And if you're the person who's always brutally honest, who always tells the hard truths, you're going to be hated and isolated. Not because you're wrong, but because you're making people uncomfortable. So you have to develop what Nietzsche might call strategic dishonesty. Not lying about important things, but knowing when to keep your mouth shut, when to give diplomatic answers, when to let people believe what they want to believe. This is how you navigate social and professional environments without making unnecessary enemies. For example, someone shows you their work and it's mediocre. You could be brutally honest and tell them it's not good. But what does that accomplish? You've made an enemy, damaged a relationship, And probably the person didn't improve anyway because now they're defensive. Or you could say, interesting approach, I might have done this part differently. And then, if they ask, you can offer specific feedback. Same information potentially communicated, but with strategic tact. The people who get ahead understand this. They know when to be honest and when to be diplomatic. They don't confuse bluntness with virtue. And this is very Nietzschean, because Nietzsche was all about effectiveness, about what actually works in reality, not about following abstract moral rules. Now, here's one of the most powerful Nietzschean insights for reading people. He talked about how morality is often just weakness dressed up as virtue. People who can't compete pretend that competing is immoral. People who can't create pretend that ambition is shallow. People who are afraid pretend that caution is wisdom. Once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. You start recognizing when people are using moral language to mask their own inadequacies. And this gives you X-ray vision for understanding motivations. When someone lectures you about morality, you can ask yourself, what are they actually afraid of? What can't they do that they're now pretending is wrong to do? Someone tells you that wanting financial success is materialistic and shallow, but probe a little deeper, and you find out they've never been good with money, or they're afraid of taking business risks. They've turned their weakness into a moral position. Once you see that, you don't let their moral posturing affect your decisions. The same thing happens with relationships, career choices, lifestyle decisions. People who are stuck will often try to convince you that being stuck is actually virtuous. They'll call it being responsible, or being realistic, or being mature. But what they really mean is they're afraid, and they want you to be afraid too, so they don't feel bad about themselves. Let me give you one final concept that ties this all together. Nietzsche talked about the Übermensch, the overman, the person who creates their own values instead of accepting society's values. Now, this doesn't mean being a rebel for rebellion's sake. It means doing the difficult work of figuring out what you actually believe, what you actually want, what kind of life you actually want to live. Most people never do this. They accept the default programming, go to school, get a job, buy a house, get married, have kids, retire, die. And there's nothing wrong with that path if it's genuinely what you want. But for most people, it's just what they're expected to do. They've never questioned whether it's right for them. When you become someone who creates your own values, you become almost impossible to manipulate. Because manipulation relies on exploiting shared assumptions. It relies on you caring about what other people think. It relies on you accepting society's definitions of success, happiness, and morality. But if you've done the work of creating your own value system, none of that works. Someone tries to shame you, you don't accept their definition of shame. Someone tries to pressure you with, what will people think? You genuinely don't care because you're not living for other people's approval. Someone tries to make you feel inadequate by their standards. You're measuring yourself by your own standards. This is the ultimate form of outsmarting people. You're not playing their game. You're playing your own game by your own rules, and you can't lose a game that you designed for yourself. So here's what you need to take away from all of this. Nietzsche gives you a framework for understanding that everything people do is driven by will to power, that morality is often weakness in disguise, that most people follow the herd without thinking, that struggle is necessary for growth, and that you need to create your own values rather than accepting society's defaults. When you internalize these ideas, really internalize them, you develop an almost supernatural ability to read people, to see through manipulation, to make decisions that serve your actual goals rather than other people's expectations. You become very difficult to control, very difficult to manipulate, very difficult to pressure into doing things that aren't in your interest. But here's the thing. This isn't about being cold or calculating or using people. It's about clarity. It's about seeing reality as it actually is, rather than as we're told it should be. And once you have that clarity, you can engage with people more honestly, more effectively, and more authentically than you ever could when you were operating from illusions. Nietzsche wasn't trying to make you into a manipulator. He was trying to wake you up. He was trying to show you that the world doesn't operate the way you were taught it operates. And once you see that, once you really see it, you can't go back. You can't unsee it. And that's when you truly become dangerous. Not dangerous to others, but dangerous to the systems and patterns that try to control you. Dangerous to mediocrity. Dangerous to the herd mentality that wants to keep you small and manageable. That's the power of Nietzsche. That's how you outsmart anyone. Not by tricks or tactics, but by understanding human nature at such a deep level that you see the game being played while everyone else is just going through the motions.